What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris, Fedor, cleveland.com, Cavs beat reporter, and Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist. And we're coming to you guys after yet another Game 7 victory. 125-94 over the Detroit Pistons, sending the Cleveland Cavaliers to their first Eastern Conference Finals without LeBron James since 1992, their first Eastern Conference Finals since 2018. Chris, we came into this game expecting a lot of things and thinking a lot of things could happen. I did not have a blowout on my docket. What did you think about tonight's contest, what it showed about this Cleveland Cavaliers team, and how they can build on this going against the Knicks in that next round?
I think it was just a reminder of this team's ceiling. When they bring it, when they play the right way, when they play their style of basketball, what they call Cavs basketball, they can be really, really formidable. And they can leave a team as good, as tough, as physical, as relentless as the Detroit Pistons searching for answers. And that's what it came down to me. Jarrett Allen was awesome. Game 7, Jarrett Allen. We talked the other night about how this was going to be a reflection on Donovan Mitchell, and this was going to be about Donovan Mitchell. You felt his presence from the very beginning. And it didn't have to be him going supernova. It didn't have to be a one-man show. It didn't have to be isolation heroics. It just had to be, can you put your imprint on the game? Can you make the other team feel your presence? And that's what Donovan did. And I thought he started the game purposefully, getting everybody else involved. He had 3 assists on their first 4 made baskets. And his passing and the way that he was attacking the Detroit defense, it just opened up everything for this team on the offensive end of the floor. It gave them a different dimension offensively. It gave Detroit something else that they had to worry about. But I think this is why when you're looking at a series and you're trying to make a prediction on it, the Cavs were always the more talented team. They were always the deeper team. They were always the more complete team. They just had to play to that level. And they didn't. They didn't at times throughout the course of the series. But it's a 7-game series, and it's the first team to 4 wins. And I think what the Cavs reminded tonight against Detroit is that beating them 4 times in 7 tries is going to be difficult. The Raptors did it 3 times. The Pistons did it 3 times. But nobody yet, to this point, this year, with this iteration of the Cavs, has been able to do it 4 times in 7 tries. Because their talent can be overwhelming. Their style can be overwhelming. The different things that they can throw at you on the offensive end of the floor when things are clicking, that can be overwhelming. The way that they can defend if you have weak points on your roster, that can be overwhelming as well. So to me, this was a narrative shifting win for the Cavs. This was a statement win for the Cavs. This was a huge step in the organization's growth. And for Donovan Mitchell, as he said, now he can breathe a little bit. I think the whole organization had a collective exhale after tonight's win. And I think they should have.
The Donovan stuff is, the stuff he was doing was so simple, but it's so important. Some of the passes he was making tonight, it's just drawing 2 and finding your big man. It wasn't anything too crazy, but I think that just speaks to how difficult it can be to modulate your mindset in these settings sometimes, because I think early in the playoffs, Donovan is relinquishing control of the offense, and when they're losing games, he's getting killed for being passive, and that I think there was some validity to that. So then he wants to flip into attack mode, and he gets a little bit tunnel vision. And so there's this happy medium for superstars, and tonight he played it perfectly. It's the old cliche, like, let the game come to you. Just poke and prod at a defense, see what they show you, and take what they give you. The simple stuff, the singles, right? That Kenny's been talking about the whole series. Like that's what it looks like. It's, the Pistons send 2 after you on, I think it was the first play, and Evan Mobley's open for a lob now. Just throw that lob. They send 2 at you, dump it off to Jarrett Allen. So many dump offs to the biggest tonight. Those have been there at other points of the series, and passes haven't been thrown. but Donovan struck a perfect balance tonight. Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley played in terms of like intensity and force, maybe the best playoff game I've ever seen them both play together. Like the Cavs out rebounded the Pistons by 9. Happens when you force more missed shots, of course, but they also outscored the Pistons by over 20 points in the paint. The Pistons fouled the Cavs 9 more times, which I guess you want to say that's physical, but to me, that was an indicator of how well you're controlling your physicality, and the Pistons weren't controlling their physicality tonight, right? Like whenever there was a scrum tonight, whenever there was a little kerfuffle, it was because the Pistons were getting a little bit overheated. And I think that had a lot to do with how uncomfortable the Cavs were making these guys. Tonight was like the theory of the series for me, where like if the Cavs score, if the Cavs run, if the Cavs look like themselves on offense, the Pistons shouldn't be able to catch up with them, and then you'll see the Pistons' flaws exacerbated. And I don't necessarily understand why it took 7 games for the Cavs to find that. I mean, over the course of the series, you do figure out more things about a team. That could be part of it, but it just seemed like tonight it was all clicking for the Cavs. I'd been saying the whole series, we haven't really had a game where the Pistons just can't make shots. Boom, tonight they just can't make shots. We haven't really had a game where the Cavs felt like they overwhelmed the Pistons with their offense. Boom, tonight. I don't think it's a coincidence that both of those things happened. But yeah, this is the theory of this team. It's a team that's really hard to keep up with scoring wise, and if you turn yourself into a fit trying to over the course of the game, particularly if you're not built for it, which the Pistons are not.
I think it's interesting because we continuously talk about the rediscovering of the offensive identity when it comes to this Cavs team. And it kind of showcased itself to Jimmy's point in tonight's contest when Donovan Mitchell was getting downhill and collapsing the defense and forcing them to react to him offensively. Then you have Sam Merrill, who's lighting up from deep, 4 threes in that first half. We saw Jarrett Allen getting dump off passes and rolling to the basket and also just dunking the ball with force. Evan Mobley having 6 assists, being able to manipulate the defense in the short roll off DHOs, and also understanding that the Cavs, when everybody is involved, that's when they're most dangerous. When everybody's a threat, that's where you're seeing this offense come to life. And obviously, there's been a learning curve and understanding of what is best for this Cavs team. And I think Jarrett Allen gave a great answer on this when I asked him about the offensive identity, because he said they can pick and choose how they want to manipulate the defense and who's on the floor, what offense they're running. And obviously, since James Harden being here, there was an understanding that the game was going to slow down. The playoffs were going to slow down possession to possession. And there was an understanding that it was beneficial to have a player like James Harden who was able to do that and plays to that style inherently. James Harden didn't have a good game 7. And yet the Cavs felt like they could go to a different style that was impactful. I think having these two dynamics and understanding when to go to them is great, but also understanding that this version, the pace, body, ball movement that the Cavs were doing, is more beneficial to what this overall team can do rather than just how James Harden can manipulate a defense.
It was also made easier by the opponent that they were playing against, and that's something that we talked about throughout the course of this series. That's something that we talked about coming into this series, is that the Pistons, for all of their wins during the regular season, they are flawed, and you saw those tonight. Tobias Harris didn't make a shot. He was supposed to be their second leading scorer. The Cavs had no concerns whatsoever in terms of guarding Asar Thompson. They had no concerns whatsoever in terms of guarding Jalen Duren. So when they were able to play the defense that they did and make Detroit have to execute offensively in the half court, and then Detroit couldn't make shots, well, the Cavs got the rebound. They were able to push the pace. They were able to play faster. They were able to attack the Pistons defense before it could get set. All of that stuff correlates. The Cavs not turning the basketball over, that correlates as well, because if you watch the two teams, one of them had to work so extremely hard for quality offense, and that was Detroit, whereas the Cavs, it felt like it was coming within the flow of the offense. It felt like they were more comfortable, felt like they were more sure of themselves. It felt like they knew what they wanted to do in the situation that they were in. And Kenny Atkinson mentioned it. This is part of the value of this particular roster. It's part of the beauty of this particular roster, is that they do have multi-dimensional players. They do have guys with versatile skill sets. So if Asar Thompson's going to be on James Harden and he's going to be pestering him like crazy, then you get the ball to Donovan Mitchell and you have him orchestrate your offense. or you start running some two-man stuff between Max Strus and the bigs, or you start saying, Evan Mobley, here's the ball, run some inverted pick and roll, attack off the dribble, or Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, run your big-to-big stuff. And that's what the playoffs calls for, guys. You know this. It's about matchups, but it's also about, can you win in a variety of ways? Can you have success in a variety of ways? Can you be successful playing big? Can you be successful playing small? Can you be successful playing fast, slow? Whatever the game calls for, how comfortable are you? How good can you be in those kinds of situations? And I do think that the way that the Cavs played tonight was in part aided by Detroit and the opponent that they were playing against. But they were able to capitalize on that. And a lot of what they were able to do on the offensive end of the floor stemmed from the fact that they defended as well as they have at any point in this 7-game series. They held Detroit to 94 points. And if they're not going to do anything offensively, the Cavs on their end of the floor don't feel a level of pressure. They don't feel like they have to go shot for shot. They don't feel like they have to force offense or force passes that aren't there. They don't feel like they have to force any kind of possession against a Sar Thompson or something like that. And like I said, if you're forcing bricks over and over and over again from the Pistons, you're going to grab the rebound. You're going to push the ball up the floor quickly. You're going to be able to generate early offense like that. And that's something that you felt from the very beginning of the game. You could sense that the Cavs, they wanted to keep it from getting mucky as much as they possibly could. And they did that. And you saw what happened. Everything opened up for this offense.
I think because we're talking about play style, conceptual ideas here, this feels like a good time to give Kenny Atkinson his flowers. This series win is a big time validation of not just the Kenny Atkinson hire, but the decision to change coaches a couple years ago in general. And it's not just because Kenny Atkinson beat JB Bickerstaff, therefore Kenny Atkinson is a better coach than JB Bickerstaff. It's about, what did you hire Kenny to do, and how did that assignment show up in these games, right? Like, they hired Kenny essentially. They fired JB because his playoff offenses lack imagination. We'll come back to that tonight. And they hire Kenny because he can add schematic pathways for more offensive success, and he's the player development guy. And the Cavs' best path forward was and still is right now, as we're sitting here May 18th, 2 a.m, player development. So I look at a series deciding Game 7 where the Cavs reach an offensive level that their opponent can't match, and I think that's a win for Kenny Atkinson. I see superstars making pretty significant adjustments about how they're playing over the course of this series. Obviously, Donovan and James are smart and they know how to self-correct, but Kenny Atkinson's in their ear telling them the kind of adjustments that they need to make, and you're seeing it bear fruit. I'm looking at Evan Mobley. Recording 4 or more assists for the 8th time in this postseason, and I'm seeing a huge player development win for Kenny Atkinson, right? And then you contrast that again. It's much easier to contrast it because they're in the same series, right? But JB, I just watching Cade tonight, I couldn't help but think, oh, that's Donovan circa 2023-24. Because the thing about Cade is not just that they're asking him to orchestrate every possession, they're then asking him to turn around and guard an all-NBA player a lot of the time at the other end. In the beginning of the series, I was amazed by it when Cade would play well and then do a pretty decent job. At least he would give the effort on both James and Donovan. But it's like, in the back of your head, it's this conversation about, like, man, can he keep that up? These playoff series, they tend to accumulate. JB Bickerstaff is talking before the game about, we play a style that, that wears you down. Ironically, by putting so much on Cade's plate, you kind of wore yourselves down a little bit. And that's where, at another area where, like, just having the diversity, it's good to have the diversity within your offense because it's harder to guard. But I also think that matters when we're talking fuel tanks in these series too. So I just think while we're having this conversation, this is a huge win for Kenny this series.
I agree. And I think it's important to continue to look forward, right? Because obviously, as Donovan Mitchell and Kenny Atkinson put, it's a huge win for them to get past the Eastern Conference semifinals. Donovan Mitchell had never done it. Kenny Atkinson helped get over the hump, right? But the understanding now is what's next? How do we get more? How do we unlock more from not only our coaching staff, but our players and our units and our styles and all these things geared more towards a New York Knicks team that has less vulnerabilities than the Detroit Pistons do, right? There's an understanding that the New York Knicks have more creators. They have Jalen Brunson. They have Karl Anthony Towns. They have still lengthy defenders and OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Mitchell Robinson, who you also have the kind of poetic return to Madison Square Garden after 3 years of playing them in the first round and kind of getting your first playoff scars. And as many as the Cavs have accumulated their playoff scars, they've also grown. They've gained experience. And this group as a whole has learned from a lot of their mistakes, a lot of their consequences, and also had to change to get to this point at all. So, Chris, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this next series, what it means that they got here, and what this game seven meant to this Cleveland Cavaliers team as a whole.
Well, to me, game 7 was just, can they meet the moment? Um, and they did. And that is very, very important. Um, it was a moment of truth for Donovan Mitchell. This wasn't about, was the team healthy enough in this playoff run? Was the coach smart enough? We talked about this on a previous podcast. He had the things that he wanted. He had the things that he needed. He believed coming into this playoff run that this was the best, most complete team that he had ever been a part of. So it was up to him to deliver. It was up to him to put his imprint on the game. But it also wasn't like just a solo act. And I think that's a really, really important thing. It wasn't just James Harden breaking down the defense over and over and over again and having to carry this huge offensive burden. It felt like a more sustainable way to play. It felt like a more sustainable way to win games. And if they're going to beat the Knicks, they're going to have to continue to lean into this more so than Donovan heroics, more so than James Harden heroics, because this is going to be the first series that the Cavs play where the other team is just as talented as them, if not more talented than them. There's at least an argument there. There wasn't with Toronto. There wasn't with Detroit. Like you said, there are fewer flaws that the Knicks have. Yeah, there are certain places where the Cavs probably feel like, hey, like we can attack, right? But they aren't loaded with all these one-way players. Like in the first round series against Toronto, the Cavs were able to guard a certain way because they just weren't concerned about dudes. Like, okay, Jakob Pertl, yeah, we're going to play you off the floor. All right, Colin Murray Boyles, we don't have to guard you beyond 10 feet. And then you could go down the list of some of those other guys, right? And then in this series against Detroit, Duncan Robinson got a target on him on defense, right? On the other side of the floor, Isaiah Stewart was a nothing. Jalen Duren was a nothing. Asar Thompson, don't have to guard him outside the paint. There is nobody on the Knicks like that. It's a roster that is filled with mostly two-way players. Of course, you can go at Jalen Brunson on the defensive end of the floor. Of course, you can probably get Karl Anthony Towns in foul trouble and stuff like that. But this is a completely different challenge for the Cavs. And I think this series against Detroit kind of crystallized why the Cavs wanted to be on the side of the bracket that they were on, why they were talking about a certain side of the bracket, because they wanted to avoid having to play this caliber opponent until they absolutely had to. And they did. And good on them for that. But they didn't believe that Toronto could match them from a personnel standpoint. They didn't believe that the Detroit Pistons were on their level. New York's different. Very, very different. Mike Brown's not JB Bickerstaff. Mike Brown has taken a team to the NBA Finals, by the way. Mike Brown has really, really brought something different with his motion offense to the New York Knicks, and it's the best offense in the playoffs so far. And it's clearly the best offense that the Cavs are going to see in this playoff run to this point. So when we talk about like formula for trying to beat the Cavs, stay competitive with the Cavs, New York has a lot of those components. They can score, they can shoot, they have a bunch of two-way players. They have elite on-ball defenders that can be pesky. I don't know that anybody is like Asar. I don't know that anybody is like Scotty Barnes, but OG Anunoby got some defensive team votes. He can guard a multitude of positions. So this is going to be a completely different challenge for the Cavs. And the thing that's going to stand out to me is just the talent gap that existed in the first two rounds is not going to be there. The one question I do have is, are the Cavs just going to be in a situation against the Knicks where they feel free from the shackles of these ridiculously physical defensive teams in Toronto and Detroit and say to themselves, "Oh my God, we have a lot more freedom here on the offensive end of the floor. Oh my God, we don't have to work as hard as the way that we worked for a majority of the series against Toronto and against Detroit." So I think that's going to be like a fascinating thing to watch unfold too.
I think the Dean Wade, Max Strus, Jalen Tyson conversation is also fascinating in this series because the Knicks are so high powered on offense. And people are going to inevitably draw the parallels back to 2023 between these two teams. Let's get this out of the way. These are drastically different teams. Both the Cavs and Knicks have four players who played minutes from that series on their team still. And one of them for the Cavs is Dean Wade, who played 11 minutes in that series. And one of them for the Knicks is Deuce McBride, who played 12 minutes in that series. So we're really talking Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, and Evan Mobley reuniting with Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, and Mitchell Robinson. Those are still all six of those guys are key guys in this series. But both of these teams have changed shapes and personalities and have grown and evolved and have changed coaches since then. So I still think the Knicks are formidable as they're still a good offensive rebounding team. I think the Cavs, you should have more confidence in the Cavs, having watched them, watched the good moments in this series against this, particularly tonight. You have to feel good about the Cavs, feel better about the Cavs in that regard tonight. We'll see. Cat and Mitchell Robinson are both aggressive on the offensive boards. And of course, the Josh Hart thing. Josh Hart was a big problem for them 3 years ago. I anticipate that he'll still be, a tough guy to box out, both because it's unique that guards crash as hard as he does and are as good at it as he does, and because he's like one of the few guys on their team that you would like to cheat off of because he's a streaky shooter. He's not shooting it super well in these playoffs, but that makes it hard to box him out, right? But those parallels, the one parallel I would want to draw is that one of the reasons the Cavs lost that series, the biggest reason the Cavs lost that series was their offense was terrible. People look at it as a rebounding series, but I think their offense was terrible series, and their offense was terrible because their spacing was like non-existent. And Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland were constantly operating in a phone booth. And I think that part of the conversation makes the Dean Wade thing fascinating because I think the Cavs, to defend the Knicks at the level they're going to need to, are going to need a healthy dose of Dean Wade in this series. But for their offense to operate at a level that can keep up with the Knicks offense, they're going to need a healthy dose of Max Strus in this series. And it would be nice if Jalen Tyson could make a reappearance to sort of toe that middle line where like he's a better defender than Max Strus in certain matchups, and he's a better shooter than Dean Wade. He needs to rediscover that jump shot. We'll see how much I think he gets, undusted to start this series, and we'll see how much leash Kenny gives him. But it's the Knicks offense is the new scary thing about the Knicks. Keeping up with the Knicks is the new scary thing about the Knicks. It's not necessarily the force, the physicality, yada, yada, yada. I think the Cavs have answered a lot of those questions. It's just like Chris said, this is such a significant punch up in offense. Yes, the Cavs will probably be feeling a little bit more free out there, but at the same time, like it's gonna we should not forget one of the biggest questions we had about this team heading in the playoffs was like, is your defense good enough? And the Knicks are going to be the first team that can really poke at that in a real way.
I think that's well said because we've talked as much about the offense being what the Cavs have leaned on, especially throughout this season, but we can't forget that the defense is what we've also had questions about, to Jimmy's point, because as much as the Cavs have said, oh, well, our offense has to help our defense, well, James Harden has reiterated that they have to lean into their defense to help their offense, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand, and we understand how important these two things are. And especially when you talk about having those two bigs and how they've developed, how they've showcased themselves in this series in particular against Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart and Paul Reed, you've seen them take some steps forward from who they were. We remember game 7, Jarrett Allen against the Toronto Raptors. Well, game 7, Jarrett Allen showed himself again against the Detroit Pistons with his activity, with his defensive prowess, with his offensive rolling, and how he attacked the rim with physicality and all these different things. I think the Cavs know and they've recognized that 48 minutes in game 7 is great. But if you can extract that level of intensity, energy, effort level for 48 minutes throughout the remaining portions of a series, then maybe you don't have to play 7 games to end the series or to compete. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they continue to grow that notion that they believe in who they are, and especially after Donovan Mitchell saying that they're not here just to get to the conference finals. They're here to get to the NBA finals. And again, this goes back to the conversation we've had on multiple times throughout this podcast. We're not the ones setting the expectations for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're setting it for themselves. And as much as they talk about who they want to be, who they believe they are, they have to continue to show it. And as much as we've said throughout this playoff run that these questions are going to continue to show themselves, especially as the series continue, because of execution meeting the moment, as Chris was mentioning earlier.
So that's the thing. They met the moment tonight in game 7. The most significant win of this franchise in about a decade. Given all the stakes, given that they were coming off an inexcusable loss at home in game 6, given all the pressure, all of the ramifications tied to this particular result. So you definitely have to give them credit for meeting the moment. But were they good in this series against Detroit? No, they were good enough to win. And look, in the playoffs, it's just you got to win 4 times in 7 tries, survive in advance. And they were good enough to beat Detroit. Just like in the previous series, they were good enough to beat the Toronto Raptors. But if we're being honest about it, they haven't shown anything in these first 2 series that would tell you they can beat Detroit or New York 4 times in 7 tries. Is there anything? Look, to this point, the Cavs have played 14 playoff games. They finally, after tonight, they finally have a positive net rating. Before tonight, they did not. It took a 31-point win in Game 7 against the Detroit Pistons to finally swing that baby into the positive. And their net rating is 1. So, like, we're talking about a team that has, so far in the playoffs, the 8th best defense, which is middle of the pack. And by the way, they've probably played the 2 most limited offenses that made the playoffs. Orlando has an argument too. There's no doubt about that. And we're talking about the 5th ranked offense, which, that's fine. That's good. But when you have James Harden and you have Donovan Mitchell and you have Evan Mobley and you have Jarrett Allen, you kind of think, even though you play against Toronto, even though you play against Detroit, you kind of think that maybe a little bit better than what they have shown on the offensive end of the floor. So if we're just talking about their playoff run in totality, I don't think there's any reason for them to get all chesty and be like, "Oh, look at us." You know what I'm saying? Like, going in the series against New York, they still have legitimate questions that they have to answer. They still have certain flaws that the Toronto Raptors were able to poke at, the Detroit Pistons were able to poke at. So it's all about surviving and advancing, and it's all about doing what you have to do in a specific series. They won the first one, they won the second one, but they really haven't played that well in 14 games in the playoffs. The reason why a big part of the reason why they're in the Eastern Conference Finals is because they played Toronto in round one and they played Detroit in round two. Had they gotten a different path, they might not have gotten this outcome. So all I'm saying is the way that they have played against Toronto and against Detroit, even though that was good enough to advance to the conference finals, that will not be good enough against the Knicks. It won't. The eighth best defense against those two limited offensive teams in back-to-back rounds, that's not going to be close to good enough against the Knicks. So the Cavs are going to have to take it to a different level, and they're going to have to show a lot more consistency than what they've shown in the first 14 games of this playoff run.
Yeah, and again, these are the expectations they set for themselves. So call us downers after uplifting, legitimately like franchise narrative altering series win. We've given everyone their flowers. It's a huge night for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They need to take it up another notch in the next round. Like fifth in offense, eighth in defense. I don't even think that like the actual numbers. Their offense has been bad. Obviously, you sort of modulate your standards for what's good offense in the playoffs, particularly when you're playing against really good defenses. But like after game 6, I was looking at what their offensive rating was, like 112.1 or something. That's what the Chicago Bulls offensive rating was during the regular season. And it's better now as playoffs are small samples, and one game like this can swing you in a major way. Then again, the Knicks are a good defense. They are not on Toronto's or Detroit's level of defense. I think there's no perfect matchup for Donovan. I think they'll try OG. I think they'll try Mikal Bridges. I think they'll try Josh Hart. There's no perfect matchup there. I think that the Knicks will frankly throw a combination of the challenges that Toronto and Detroit threw at them, while also, again, just raising the level that you have to meet higher. So more by that, I mean, like, I think because the Knicks don't have an awesome, we're just spitballing here. I haven't watched the Knicks when did the Knicks last play? Like 10 days ago. The Knicks have been on the beach for all I know. But like the Knicks are gonna probably, because they don't have a perfect matchup for Donovan, I would guess they'll throw some of those funky coverages that Toronto did and see how he reacts to them, see what he's learned from those things, right? I would also expect that they're going to try to rough him up a little bit like Detroit did. And then if they have anything approaching the kind of success that either of those teams did at different times, then it's going to hurt even worse because, again, the Knicks' baseline for offense is much higher. This is a series where James Harden's production is going to be very, very important. James Harden gets a pass tonight for having another terrible Game 7. I do think we need to credit him for only having one turnover when that was a huge problem for him in this series, and that was like one of the things that Detroit depended on to score points. 6 assists, 1 turnover. Doesn't sound like much when the rest of the numbers are what they are, but like that was actually very helpful tonight. And James Harden continues to be a stabilizing force in the non-Donovan Mitchell minutes that the Cavs have never had. Since Donovan Mitchell has been here in the playoffs, James Harden has been mostly good. Up a level. We're going to need a little bit more of like throwback James Harden. We're probably going to need 1 or 2 games where like Donovan Mitchell and James Harden are both rolling. Because again, the Knicks have like Jalen Brunson, Karl-Anthony Towns, like OG Anunoby can get you 30 in a playoff game. Mikal Bridges has had a weird season, but like he had some moments after OG Anunoby went down in that Sixers series. And like if they figure that part out of it, like really look out. We want to talk about like the Cavs, but for Tobias Harris came back to earth at the end of the series, but like the Cavs were legitimately scrambling to guard Tobias Harris. Couldn't guard him at certain points of this series because the only reliable wing defender they have, Dean Wade, they need to put on Cade Cunningham. The Knicks got 2 guys who can like really do stuff with the ball that are wing sized, plus Jalen Brunson. I actually kind of think this is going to be a high scoring series, and that means the Cavs are going to need to be executing at a level that we just haven't seen them execute yet in the playoffs.
I also think you have to point this out. New York doesn't have the reputation that Detroit does defensively. New York doesn't have the reputation that Toronto does defensively. It's the second best defense in the playoffs to this point. And part of that is, they played against Philly, and sometimes Joel Embiid was there and sometimes he wasn't. But they played against Atlanta in round 1. And as that series went on, they started to figure it out more and more and more. And we know how potent Atlanta can be on the offensive end of the floor. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think them being second in defense tells the entire story, but they have played against some pretty good offenses and they have found solutions. And I think you also have to point out that Mike Brown, the head coach of the Knicks, built his reputation way back when on being a defensive-minded coach. So he's able to find some things defensively. And like I said, the personnel for the Knicks, it's different than Detroit, but it's also in some ways a more complete roster, a more versatile roster that the Cavs are going to have to, I think it's one of those situations where because they're coming off this series against Detroit and they didn't have to guard Asar and they didn't have to guard Jalen Duren, like they're going to have to really, really get it back in their head of like, oh, Evan Mobley can't just play free safety or Jarrett Allen can't just like camp in the paint and not have to guard his assignment. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like playing against this SEC team in football. And it's like, they're fast, but like you have to play against it. You have to feel it and you have to be reminded of it like in the moment. And for the Cavs, they're coming off this series where they had a couple of different guys where they just didn't have to guard at all. That does not exist to the same level with New York. And it makes for a completely different challenge. And it puts more pressure on Donovan Mitchell. It puts more pressure on Max Strus if he's going to be in the starting lineup. It puts more pressure on James Harden, all at the point of attack. Because what Evan and Jarrett were able to do in this particular series against the Pistons, they're not going to be able to do defensively against the Knicks because they actually have to guard somebody.
And to that point, this is a Knicks team that's coming in rested. They're coming in after having multiple days off because they have the benefit of sweeping the Philadelphia 76ers, right? So not only have they been game planning and resting, but they've been recovering, recuperating, OG Anunoby and that hamstring, right? How are you going to benefit from those extra days off? How are you going to have this conversation of rest versus rust? And I think it's an interesting one, especially in this situation where the Cavs have not only played one game seven, they played two to this point, 14 games. And the schedule is not getting any easier. It's still going to be every other day. And it's going to test the Cleveland Cavaliers and how much they have really worked on that conditioning that they mentioned throughout the regular season, how much mental toughness they've grown. And it's not just because they're going up against a team that still can get into you and has a good defense and good offense, but they have to continue to play to this level. And to Jimmy's point, even better than they have already throughout the majority of this postseason run. So I think it's interesting. I think we'll have to continue to have this conversation as the series continues. But Chris, in that vein, I hope your bags are packed because game one is on Tuesday and it's almost looking like it's time to get on the road.
Well, the Cavs had their bags packed. That's all that really matters, is that they brought enough clothes for the New York trip because they had no designs on going back to Cleveland. They were ready for New York, and I think that tells you where their focus level was.
1,000%. And I guess that means that we have to turn our mindset on to the New York Knicks, as we already have done briefly, but it's time to get into that bag entirely different way. But until then, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. Thank you for joining us. We out.